Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. I'm your host for today's episode, Lee Hutchison, and you can find all our other amazing shows on thenerdparty.com. We've got Nerd Nuptial on a Monday, all the way through to Missing Frames on a Sunday. And for a change, I'm not joined by Dallas, I'm joined by a former guest here on Filibuster. We spoke at all the way back in January, all the way, I think it was like episode 65, and here we are, well into the hundreds now. I'm joined by Carlos Miranda. How are you, Carlos?
I'm great, Lee. Thank you very much for having me.
This was like a conversation we teased that we would definitely have to do all the way back in January, and it's now taken us all the way until July to get back together again. Life seems to have been quite busy for both of us.
Yeah, no, it's been. I've had a crazy couple of months, and obviously I re-listened to parts of our last discussion in preparation for this, and when I saw the timestamp on it, I was like, wait, did we do this in January? So on the one hand, it feels like it was just yesterday, and on the other hand, it feels like it's been years since the last time we talked. So thank you very much for having me back.
One of the things that I found quite funny was I was in where the website that hosts all our podcasts, and you can see how many people have listened in the past 7 days or the past kind of, forever really. And for some reason, and I don't know how, because we haven't tweeted about it, we haven't promoted it in any way, for some reason 3 people this week have listened to that Deep Space Nine episode. So even after all these months, some people are still finding it and listening to it, which is quite amazing when you consider all the Star Trek podcasts that are out there.
Well, I definitely one of those people was me, because I listened to it again. So I don't know but whoever the other 2 people were, I'm glad that they listened in. Hopefully they'll listen to this discussion.
Absolutely, and one of the things obviously we were going to kind of talk about Star Trek Voyager today, but at the time of recording, we've just had Comic Con's just happened, and the new Star Trek Discovery trailer has come out. I've only watched it the one time. I'm trying to keep myself, kind of calm on these things. What was your reaction to the news and coverage of the past few days for Star Trek Discovery?
So, legitimately, I loved it. I thought it was great. It was, it was everything a trailer needed to be. It was fun, action-packed, had some great shots, some great character moments. I thought the introduction of Linus, the Saurian crew member, at the end was kind of funny and cute. And I was totally into it. And by the way, I mean, I forget his name, but the actor that they got to play Pike, I mean, he really does look like, he doesn't look exactly like Christopher Pike, but he could, like Jeffrey Hunter, but he looks like he could be Jeffrey Hunter's son. It's amazing the way, his look and feel, it screams Pike.
Yeah, I was really impressed with him. I love the uniform, and he's just got that kind of swagger, and he almost reminds me. I really do see sort of that Jeffrey Hunter in him. I really like Bruce Greenwood's performance in the Star Trek movies, but this one feels like it's really come from that vein of the kind of original, the Cage of Christopher Pike that we've all know and love. I was really impressed, and I think a lot of people are saying, oh, he's going to be the captain for the season. I don't really see that being the case. I maybe see that being the first maybe 5 or 6 episodes until they have the break and he's the captain for that mission, and then our permanent captain comes in. I can't see him being the captain full time, or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. What's your feeling on it?
No, I thought that too. What was interesting is that if you look at when they started filming to where they are right now, I actually think that all of that footage probably only comes from the first 2 episodes, maybe the first 3, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you look at when the announcement was made that shooting had started, and the fact that Jonathan Frakes was shooting the second episode, they can't be like too far along the season, and a lot of those effect shots were done. So that means that they in terms of post production and things like that, that means that a lot of, especially the effect shots, were probably only coming from the first 2 episodes. Maybe there were a couple of other scenes. So I'm with you. I actually think that the whole Enterprise, Pike, Spock mission is probably only going to be the first 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah, that's my feeling as well. And I think with I think they've probably ramped up some of the post-production on some of the episodes to have something that they can show at Comic-Con. It is such a good opportunity for them to promote the show and get people involved and interested in. I think a few years ago when they talked about Star Trek Discovery, and it was basically like a somewhat okay CGI rendered trailer of the Discovery coming out of an asteroid. So I think with this, they've probably ramped up just a little bit to kind of get something out there. But I'm excited to see so much of the bridge crew being involved, and that was something that kind of was coming together in the final run of episodes. So yeah, colour me optimistic and excited, but frustrating that we've got to wait all the way till January. But it's quite nice that we're going to have these mini episodes in the meantime to keep us going till then.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think the what's nice, I always think about, the first season of any show is tough, right? You got to introduce the characters, you have to build the story, introduce the world. Even if it is Star Trek, it doesn't matter. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Voyager later on, but I enjoyed the first season of Discovery a lot. But I always think that any show, if you look at any Star Trek show, really it's the second season when the show really starts to gain it, to find its footing. And I feel like that's going to be the same with Discovery. I think we're going to get a lot more episodes where the crew and the actors themselves feel very relaxed in the characters, and I'm really looking forward to kind of experiencing that and seeing a more relaxed, confident bridge crew. And obviously, the first season has been such a success, right? So I think all of that will manifest itself into a much more relaxed and more comfortable second season.
Absolutely. So I think we'll meet up again in early January to talk about Discovery. It would be quite fitting to mark that together.
I'm in. Count me in.
And sort of before we kind of dive into today's episode, it seems like a good chance at the beginning of this that we were talking about Star Trek podcasts and episodes, that you're no stranger to Star Trek podcasts yourself, and you've been kind of busy on one lately. If people are, love hearing you talk about Star Trek and can't wait till potentially later in the year to hear more of you talking about it, where can kind of people tune into you?
Well, I don't have I don't have my own show or anything like that. I'm nowhere near as cool as you, Lee, or a handful of other friends. But I'm lucky enough to kind of be on Trek Ranks quite a bit. I was just on Trek Ranks last month. For the Major Kira episode, and I was actually happened to be in California, so I was lucky enough to record it in the same room as Jim Morehouse. Many of you know him as kind of Enterprise Extra on social, so it was very cool. So I'm on Trek Ranks. I write for Trek News periodically. Life has been too busy for me to kind of do anything substantial recently, but I will be kind of representing Trek News at the big destination Birmingham convention, so I'm really excited about that. I love getting a hold of their Twitter feed, which is always a lot of fun. So I'm on Twitter as Double Mac. 90% of my tweets are about Star Trek. I'm on Trek Ranks, and every once in a while I get to talk to you, Lee.
Exactly. So let's kind of dive into today's episode. We spoke in January that we would have to do a kind of Voyager follow-ups. So we're kind of doing Star Trek really out of alignment. We dived into Deep Space Nine. We're on to Voyager, so we must do Enterprise next, surely, before Discovery, and then backtracking all the way back to the original series and so on. But Voyager, I mean, it's crazy to think it's been 24 years now since it first aired. It's kind of crazy to process that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember vividly. I mean, I had 3 friends over to the house. I remember vividly I was 12 or I was 12 or 13 years old 13 when Voyager started, and I had a little bit of a viewing party. I had 2 friends that were really into Star Trek, and my mom got us pizza, and we were all in the living room watching Voyager, and I just remember vividly just the moment of excitement and that kind of the new show starting and the new crew and the new ship. And so to me, Voyager is a very we'll talk about this. I have a very complicated history with Voyager, but that first episode, that excitement building up, there's really nothing like it. It's amazing, and I cannot believe it's been 24 years.
So what was that kind of first night like? Like, I always love, I remember my Voyager first night. What was it kind of like for you, and the suspense, and how did that all kind of come around for you?
I mean, I think, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure. Caretaker, to me, is an amazing episode. It's a phenomenal it's a phenomenal pilot up until the last 1 minute, which is which we'll talk about later. But I think that episode is just kind of hits every note it needs to hit, right? It's fun. Every character gets at least one, if not two or three, fantastic moments. And I think, well, going back to your question, the lead up, I was obsessed with Star Trek as a kid. I'm 36 years old now, and I'm still obsessed with Star Trek. But as a kid in particular, I remember going to these Star Trek conventions when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and I couldn't sleep the night before a Star Trek convention because I would be so excited, and I still get like that. I can now sleep, but before, and so I just remembered the build up and things like when you grow up when back then, especially, TV Guide, you'd have about a couple of months before they'd do an issue, and then Entertainment Tonight would have something, and obviously it was before the internet, before all of this, so you would have to plan your schedule to make sure that you were home to watch the Entertainment Tonight behind the scenes thing, or the E channel, making of, and it was just this amazing build up to the beginning of a Star Trek series. And Voyager, and Voyager was particularly special because obviously it was the flagship show for a brand new network in the US, UPN. So there was so much build-up because it was also the launch of this brand new network. So it was a really big deal.
Yeah, for me it was somewhat of a kind of different one. It was, I think, with this, I remember it almost perfectly, and it's such an odd way officially to probably kind of release a TV series. With this, I think it was 94, obviously Voyager kind of came out. It was 1996 before it came here in the UK, and they had it on a night called Star Trek Night, which was pretty funky. So Voyager premiered on UK kind of terrestrial TV at 10 to 11 at night during the week, and ran till 20 past midnight, which was bizarre. They had this whole kind of night where they had it started 7:15, and then they had a quiz show hosted by Peter Smith and John Kolchak. Then they had some spoof stuff, some interviews with Star Trek fans. They had an hour-long documentary talking about the history of Star Trek. There was an hour-long documentary all about the musical careers of the actors, and then all the way at 10 to 11 at night, it was the UK terrestrial premiere of Voyager, which was pretty kind of unique way to do it, which I was still at school at the time. I would have been 9, so I would have had to have put the tape in, gone to bed, and then woken up the next day to watch it properly. And I can always remember being really impressed with it, thinking it was really good. And I always remembered losing the VHS tape that had been recorded on. I imagine my dad probably taped some football or something on it afterwards. And I always remembered it was sort of around Christmas time the VHS came out, and I remember opening it first thing on Christmas morning. I was excited to watch it again. There's always something special about a Star Trek pilot, and for some reason the VHS was defective and it had no audio at all, so we had to return it a few days later to a Woolworths or something like that, and there was no copies of Caretaker left, so I ended up having to buy All Good Things instead. So it was a pretty interesting way to start my Voyager experience anyway.
Well, yeah, it's a little bit different. I mean, obviously, yeah, it was so funny how, because now we're used to things being released, whether it's films or TV shows, based on the same day, or at least the same, within the same week or two all over the world, right? But back then, I mean, it wasn't even that long ago, but back then everything was just so different. The thing about Voyager to me as well is that, so my dad's a mechanical engineer, and we lived in Houston, Texas at the time, so he does mostly oil, and that'll make sense in a second. So so we were living in Houston, Texas when it aired in January and of 1995, and then in August of that same year we moved to Saudi Arabia. So I spent several years of my teenage years living in a compound in Saudi Arabia because of my dad's job, and there we used to get Voyager and Deep Space Nine on this American military channel, and they basically did a similar thing. It wasn't branded Star Trek Night, but they had one night of the week where they would play season 6, maybe five or 6 of Deep Space Nine, and that first season of Voyager. But it was literally, I mean, almost a year behind, right? So I watched Voyager like a year behind my friends in the U.S. that were Trekkies, right? And I always found that so unbelievably frustrating. And so yeah, but it is amazing how now we take it for granted when things, especially big, Discovery airs in the U.S. on like a Sunday and then everywhere else on Monday. But back in the day, it used to be like, it used to be months, if not years, between the U.S. premiere and everywhere else.
We touched on it there as well, that it's such an enjoyable pilot, though it's amazing. It's almost perhaps an episode of its time. Like, I always find it odd when I rewatch it that sort of the momentum seems to kind of change a bit when they go to this southern kind of drawl farmyard, essentially. And it's such I couldn't imagine that now in a Star Trek pilot, is them having that corn on the cob, the weird shtick with that. That always struck me as really random.
No, it is kind of random, but I mean, if you look at so much of Star Trek in that time, there were all these, especially the holodeck episodes. It's almost like they wanted to, like they were writing all those writers and all those producers were working on so much Star Trek. It's like every opportunity they had to not put the cast in spacesuits and to do something that was really kind of brought back down to earth, and they just kind of jumped on that opportunity, right? And there's so many episodes of Star Trek like that, whether it's Time's Arrow or anything else, where it's just like they're in the U.S., some element of the U.S. But it is a little bit odd now when you watch that. It's just very jarring in compared to what comes before and really what comes after. It's a very jarring setting, and I wonder if they just had if they had the set for, they could get access to that set, cheaply or something.
Yeah. So I'm curious as well, like we both mentioned that it's got an ending that sort of undermines quite a lot of the pilot and premise of Voyager, that after 86 minutes the crews of the Maquis and Voyager and the Federation are all one big sort of happy family. For the large part, they're already in the uniforms, they've already been given positions. What was your kind of reaction to that premise, like going into Voyager and then sort of the execution of it over that sort of episode and then subsequent seasons?
I think that's a really good question, and I think that really goes to the heart of maybe why I certainly do, and obviously we'll talk about this over the course of this conversation. But I think this is probably representative of a good chunk of Star Trek fans out there. Like, I love Star Trek, full stop, right? Here we are 24 years after our show premiered, like talking about it on a Sunday evening, right? So we love Star Trek, and I love the tapestry that is Star Trek, full stop. But just because I love the tapestry doesn't mean that I love every single corner of it. And I think, to me, I think Voyager is particularly interesting because I think it was the first time that I was kind of old enough to be critical of something that I loved. Deep Space Nine, I watched the Emissary live when I was 9 or 10. I started watching Star Trek with Next Generation around season 5, and before then I just loved everything that had Star Trek slapped on it, like everything. I was never critical of anything, but I remember watching Caretaker and loving every second of it, even the hokey, Southern in the U.S., corn on the cob scene. But I remember getting to the very, very end and being like, at 12 years old, and being like, what is it, like, what are you talking about, the Maquis or all of a sudden Starfleet? That doesn't make any sense. And it had to do with so much buildup in both Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, which I was watching live, which I was recording and rewatching over and over and over again. This idea that the Maquis are these quote-unquote terrorists / freedom fighters, depending on your point of view, and they were not Starfleet, and they were fighting against Starfleet. They were fighting against Cardassia for their freedoms and for their homes. And all of a sudden, you take these very strong-willed characters that you're supposed to believe, that Chakotay and B'Elanna in particular, and at the end of the show, all of a sudden they're Starfleet. And I remember that hitting me when I was 12. And it's still something that, here we are at 36, 24 years later, still kind of bugs me. And I've never been able to kind of reconcile it. And I think that that's my, the heart of my, well, at least maybe not the heart, but it's definitely a big part of my complicated relationship with Voyager.
I think with I share the same issue as well. Like I was coming to that age where I could start to be a bit more critical of things, and especially after you've had something like kind of the Next Generation, and then it's gone into the films. And Generation's maybe a bit of a mixed bag, but you have something like First Contact's kicking about, and then you've got Deep Space Nine just going from strength to strength. And then, we always know that kind of Star Trek at the time in the mid-90s wasn't really sort of much of a crossover universe. It had the odd thing here and there, but pretty much for the most part, their universes were largely separate, unless you had, unless it was sweep season and you wanted to, bring over a Jonathan Frakes or something like that to a franchise. But, the fact that, Deep Space Nine in Season 2 with the Maquis had built up the threat and interest of the Maquis, and even kind of... we had that with the Next Generation. We had Journey's End. We had the end of Rolaran's Adventure, which even then kind of tied in that. So it was there was a lot of this investment going into sort of Voyager of the Maquis, and that's something that was very unique at the time. And then to see that kind of all undone quite quickly, and then to see sort of Deep Space Nine and subsequent seasons really go that extra bit further with how they, tackled Voyager, the Maquis, and how they, made them a threat, gave them a lot of interesting things that were going on, made them really interesting thieves or, terrorist sympathizers.
Eddington.
Eddington was it was so good, and it was why could this not have been Voyager? And then I think with even things outside of Star Trek, something like Battlestar Galactica comes along just a couple of years after Voyager, and we all know Ronald D. Moore came onto Voyager for a couple of episodes in Season 6 and then went, no, this isn't for me, I can't do this, and walked away. And then what we saw in Battlestar Galactica was the Voyager that we were somewhat promised, in terms of not just the Maquis, but in how they would deal with resources, where they would all go, and the survival element. And it just made you frustrated, thinking, damn, Voyager really was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that's the thing I agree with you completely. I remember once reading an interview, I think it was with Brandon Braga, and he talked about Year of Hell, and how much he loved Year of Hell. And Year of Hell is a great episode, but how he wanted basically the entire series to kind of be Year of Hell. Maybe, I'm sure that was a little bit of an exaggeration, but the underlying idea was that it started off as a Starfleet ship, and by the end, it had to be, in order to survive, it was almost like a shadow of Starfleet, because they would have to compromise their values, take on alien technology, new crew, all of this kind of stuff. And I feel like that would have been an infinitely more interesting show. And again, it's not to shit on Voyager. I love Star Trek. I love Voyager. And there's a lot of things that I really, really love about Voyager. And I'd go to the mattresses for it. There's a good 20 episodes of Voyager that I think are as good as any episodes of Star Trek. But I just think that, to me, Voyager is this kind of, you've said it, it was kind of a missed opportunity. It had arguably one of the best premises in all of Star Trek, and this idea of being cut away from the fleet, cut away from the Federation. It never fully realized the potential of the meta narrative.
Yeah, it could have been something so special and unique, and I think it ended up just becoming, a sort of diluted version of the Next Generation, and it makes you so kind of happy that something like Deep Space Nine was on the go at the other time, because at least you had the choice of something where, if you weren't particularly enjoying Voyager, you could go into Deep Space Nine and get everything that you were missing. You could get the serialized television, you could get people fighting for survival, these grand episodes, whereas Voyager just felt so safe. It was like, if you were like me and you grew up with the Next Generation, that's such an enjoyable show, it's so great. And then Deep Space Nine sort of right, you're a grown up now, you're a teenager, these are the sort of things that will kind of reward you later in life, whereas Voyager feels like sort of retreading childhood in a way. And that's something that, when you've got something as good as the Next Generation, it's like, I don't really want to do perhaps this again, and that was a frustration thing.
Yeah, it's like the Diet Coke to Next Generation's Coke, right? And that, to me, is the problem with the show. And again, it's just a complicated relationship with it, because I do love it, and there's a lot of elements that I love. There's a lot of episodes. There's a lot of things I love about it. But I am so much more critical of Voyager than I am of any other Star Trek series, and I think it had to do with the fact that it came on just after Next Gen, 6 months after Next Gen, 7 months after Next Gen ended, while Deep Space Nine was still on the air, and I'm sure that there are, you can read like the 50-year mission and all kinds of behind-the-scenes drama, how involved the studio was and UPN itself was in Voyager, in comparison to something like Deep Space Nine, which they just kind of was like in the corner doing their own thing, and that's part of the reason why it was allowed to be so different and so special. But I know that behind the scenes there was a lot of pressure on Voyager to kind of replicate Next Generation's unbelievable success, right? So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, carry on.
No. And so I think that from a fan's perspective, it might be, we don't know the full story. It may not necessarily be fair, but we can only judge it on the finished product. And here we are, many years later, almost 20 years after it finished. And when you look at the series as a whole, I can't help but feel, man, the premise was so good. The all the raw ingredients, all the raw materials to be processed into something awesome was there. It just didn't quite nail it.
No, but like we both touched on, there's so many things that we perhaps enjoyed about Voyager, and we don't want to be too negative. When you think about Voyager, and someone went like, think of you're on your Trek ranks show. What are your top things that you love about Voyager and you think that it did well, or it could be characters or moments?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm sure we'll talk about favorite episodes at another, later on, but there's a lot to love here, a lot. I think the premise is awesome, right? Obviously, Next Generation, again, was just off the air, and Deep Space Nine was on the air, so they needed to do something a little bit different, and this kind of, Star Trek version of Lost in Space, very cool. This idea of a starship, kind of like the original series, right? Out there, out in space, really cut off from the fleet, and on the other side of the galaxy. It was just so I think, the premise itself is awesome. So I love the premise. I think the characters of Janeway, Seven, and the Doctor are characters for the ages. Like, those are three of my all-time favorite Star Trek characters, right? I think Janeway is an amazing captain. Super relatable. I think Kate Mulgrew has has tons of personality. I love the character. I think Seven, we'll talk about Seven later on. The Doctor, just amazing characters. So I think things like the premise, the characters, the opening credits. If I had to, if someone put a gun to my head and said you can only ever see one opening credits, pick right now. I want to say Deep Space Nine, but really, the opening credits and theme of Voyager, I remember watching that for the first time and just being blown away. Each sequence is more spectacular. Just when you think, the camera going through the rings of the planet are it, then you have the eclipse and the warp. Oh my God, like the theme, Jerry Goldsmith. It's just the opening credits, the theme. There's a lot to love.
And I think, like, with the credits as well, it's like the only credits that really never changed in a Star Trek series at all. Like, from 1 to 7, that was exactly it. I remembered watching, I think it was maybe like season 3 or 4 for the first time, thinking, right, here we go. Like, they usually change them about this time. Wonder what they're going to do slightly different. But, like, they kept that from episode 1 all the way to the end, which was very rare in Star Trek. Even sort of Enterprise, it's still the same credits, but they changed the music. It was a little more up tempo, and then it was a little different. So like that, those credits are just a thing of beauty, and I'd love to see something like that in HD one day.
Oh no, totally. And I think one of the things that makes it is the ship design. I think ship design in Voyager is amazing. I think the Voyager itself is one of my favorite Star Trek ships of all time. It was so beautiful and so influential that I don't think that any ship, and I'm sure somebody on Twitter can let us know if this wasn't the case, but no ship after the Voyager design, like Voyager design changed Starfleet design, or and behind the scenes Star Trek design forever. We never got a ship with a neck after Voyager. You think of the Sovereign class, the Enterprise E. Any ship that came after the Voyager was much more of this kind of beautiful, streamlined. The two holes were kind of connected rather than being connected through a neck. Just I think the ship itself is amazing. You think of things like the Delta Flyer and the Nova class, the Prometheus class, all of the, particularly the Starfleet ships designed for Voyager, each one is more beautiful than the last. And so I think that there is, from a design point of view, I love the bridge of Voyager. Jesus, the two black chairs are amazing. Just with the if you think of the Enterprise D bridge with the three chairs and the horseshoe in the back, I think that, to me, that's a thing of that's a thing of beauty. But from aesthetically as well, when you have those beautiful shots and it's just the two chairs and that giant lighted cutout of the Voyager behind them, it's beautiful and it's iconic. So I think the something that I don't hear a lot of people talk about is just how beautiful the Starfleet designs, in particular, inside engineering, things like that, of Voyager are. I think they're amazing.
And I think as well with like Voyager, it was at that kind of period in history where things were moving away from traditional models, and they could like design things in unique ways. Like whenever we saw the Enterprise D perhaps in a space battle or exploring, it was pretty much the same kind of shot of the ship moving in. If we were seeing it in action, it was pretty rare. Whereas like Voyager, like CGI kind of opened them up to be these sorts of big uses of the ships. Flying in through asteroid belts or engaging with Borg cubes and whatever. So yeah, it was quite exciting. That kind of, it was on that sort of cusp of history and of that era, and it Deep Space Nine never really got to use CGI in the same way that Voyager did.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that the ship itself lent itself to CGI, and they did it really well. Obviously some of the effects, now that I'm watching it on like a big TV on Netflix, it's not in HD. Not all the effects are hold up, particularly the CGI, given how many years have gone by. But still, the ship design and those basic, it's a thing of beauty. And I think the in addition to the ship designs, there's a lot of Alien of the Weeks on Voyager with just like a weird forehead or a weird, we were promised all these new crazy aliens and we really didn't get it. But when we got them, they were awesome, right? Like the Vidians, the Hyrogens, the 3472, all those guys, they were cool and different. So even though they didn't kind of knock it out of the park every week with their aliens, every once in a while they did have like an alien design and an alien race for like the ages, which I think is a credit to them.
Absolutely. Kind of going in, so like, with that, there was sort of some kind of shortcomings, as it were. Like Voyager, was very episodic, but there would be arcs that would come up and then kind of vanish and disappear. What were some of those sorts of shortcomings for you, perhaps in terms of the arcs and the storytelling in that respect?
I think the biggest shortcoming for me was always that there are two that pop into mind, and one is the Maquis. You have, again, going back to what we were saying earlier, there had been so much groundwork laid around who the Maquis were as people and what they were fighting for, and who the kind of people that fought for the Maquis were. You had people like Rolaren. So I always thought it was such a massive missed opportunity to integrate those crews right away. Could those two crews have been integrated over the course of the journey? Totally. Should it have been done in the last 2 minutes of the first episode? Absolutely not. It should have been something like, season 2 or season 3, even later on, when you finally get those crews to accept, if you think of Deep Space Nine and you think of how long, really getting the likes of Kira working within Starfleet rules and protocols. Arguably, there are episodes in season 7 where she's like, absolutely not, I'm doing things my way. The opening of season 7 when she goes up against the Romulans, right? In her own version of the Kira missile crisis type thing. And so I just think it was to me, the integration of those crews really undermined the show, especially when you think of how strong a character, from a personality perspective, how strong of a character B'Elanna and Chakotay were, right? So I think that to me is like one of the biggest mistakes.
Yeah, I think especially the fact that this was such an exciting TV series premise of like these two crews, and there's nothing like that. You always think of sort of, this season 3 of Deep Space Nine was when Voyager launched, so we were starting to get that kind of conflict really in Deep Space Nine, and sort of that Rick Berman, no conflict, no drama in that respect. That he was kind of taking from Gene Roddenberry was starting to kind of slip off a little bit. So you kind of felt like this was ripe for that conflict, because that's where so much drama comes from. And I think with Voyager, it had such a great premise. It was a series that went for 7 seasons, 100, maybe 60 odd episodes, give or take. And they've undermined themselves straight away by, making everything pretty peaceful for the most part. There was the odd element of conflict, especially kind of from someone like B'Elanna, but it's like you had so much episode potential there. You had so much chance to make drama and interesting television, and they've undermined themselves as writers and as kind of stories just so early on. It would have been so interesting to find out what the series would have been like if we had allowed that to kind of grow more naturally.
Yeah, no, I get, yeah, and I just think, and it also highlights, I feel like the characters on Voyager, again, are for me the most problematic. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but I can't think. If you think of Deep Space Nine, and maybe it's unfair to always compare it to Deep Space Nine, but in my mind, they were the shows that really overlapped for many, for a variety of years. So it is kind of fair to compare them, and they are definitely sister shows. It's hard to find weak links within Deep Space Nine, and I think we said this on the last time we talked. But I know more. We as an audience knew more about a character like Rom or Leda or Martog than we ever did, like with a character like Kes or Harry Kim, right? And I just think that in a show that was that was based on one ship, and they were on the other side of the galaxy trying to make their way home, it should have been. I'm not necessarily advocating for full-on serialization the way Deep Space Nine did these massive arcs, or the way we're used to watching television now. It was a different time, and it's not necessarily fair to kind of project contemporary TV watching sensibilities backwards in time. But there should have been a lot more serialization on that show, even if it's just minor story points. And I think the characters are, whether it's the Maquis integration, but I just feel like the characters on Voyager, with the exceptions of the Voyager, of the Doctor, Seven, and Janeway, just weren't as strong. You had those 3 characters, which again I'll always argue for as being some of the best in Trek, and I love those 3. I love the actors, love everything about them, love episodes that deal with them. But then you had kind of this middle bucket of characters that, at least for me, were okay but not great. People like B'Elanna, Chakotay, and Tuvok, maybe Paris. But if I think of my least favorite characters in all of Star Trek, it is hands down Harry Kim, Kes, and Neelix. Neelix isn't my least favorite or anything, far from it. But those 3 are not good characters to me. I think Harry Kim is the worst character in all of Star Trek, and I've always said that. I have nothing against Garrett Wang. I don't know him. I'm sure he's a lovely person in real life, so it has nothing to do with him. But as a character, he there is zero character development, and he's kind of creepy. Especially with women, and it's just So I think that the Maquis integration being one thing, that the first kind of cardinal sin of Voyager. The second for me is the fact that so many characters were either forgettable or just probably really bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Harry Kim, and the joke is, he was never promoted. He was forever an ensign, and in a way that sort of summed up the the development in Voyager. And then I think someone like Tom Paris, who was he was given a lieutenant position in the beginning of season 1, and then he lost it in an episode. I love that 30 Days, and then he was demoted, and then he was promoted again in season 7. And there's Harry Kim. Where's mine? And it's just the character was just he was forgettable by even sort of the story development and giving him, any sort of joint responsibility. I know he commanded a ship once or twice, but he could have been an interesting character, and he could almost have been the show's Bashir, a character in the beginning that, likewise, very enthusiastic, kind of creepy, but then Bashir grew to be one of the most interesting and greatest characters in Star Trek history for me. But very few of those characters in Voyager had that sort of same arc. But when I think of characters that had an arc where they were completely different almost from the start, I think of someone like Tom Paris, Plana Torres, the Doctor, Seven of Nine. These were characters where they invested in growing them, developing them, putting their backs against the wall. They had things to overcome. They had really interesting, issues. Some of them were quite grey at times. That's the best kind of writing for a character. And so many of the characters, someone like Tuvok was denied things like that. Chakotay, genuinely terrible. You hear Robert Beltran complaining many a time about the character, and I think that was completely justified. And again, it's like, you've got 160 odd episodes, 7 seasons. You've got plenty that you can write about with these characters. It could be such an exciting opportunity to grow them, but instead they maybe do things like Irish pubs instead of why don't we give Chakotay a good episode to kind of grow upon, and him almost being denied that growth of we have this conflict with the Maquis. He was completely kneecapped as soon as he did something like that, and he was hamstrung, and it showed in the writing for the rest of this show.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think that's again representative of Voyager as a whole, right? The premise, the idea behind a character like Kes was awesome. This character that only lived 6 or 7 years, right? What that meant, and really Kes in season 3 to Kes season 1 is exactly the same character. It was only later when she shows up in Fury, which, by the way, I was once at a work event, and I met this guy, and we're sitting there talking, and it turned out that he was a television director, and so we're talking and blah blah blah. And he directed Fury, and I was like, and I totally geeked out, and I probably came off a little too strong, but it was just random. So every time I think of Fury, I think of sitting next to this random guy who directed the episode at a work thing here in London. But it took an episode like Fury later on to kind of show her being older and things like that. But really, the idea behind some of these characters, I agree with you. Harry could have gone a la Bashir, which, I agree with you, Bashir, 100%. Bashir started off as overly eager, Wesley-esque, kind of creepy, particularly with women, and then grew to be this, amazing, lovable, him and we've talked about this. Him and O'Brien have, I think, the most genuine relationship in all of Star Trek. So it's just the idea behind a lot of these characters was there, Chakotay, B'Elanna, but they just weren't given the stories or the character arcs to really to be realized in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and it's just you feel for the actors as well, and you hear them sometimes talk about Deep Space Nine, what a family it was to be involved in that kind of show, and then on Voyager there seems to have been a bit more perhaps conflict with the cast and crew, and displeasure, and going, well, what was this about? What was the point of that? Well, mostly from Robert Beltran, I must say, but it just feels that. I think everyone was let down with something like that. It's just, and that's a real shame. And I think with Voyager, we enjoy it, but we're critical of it. But I can't be denied that Voyager has a fanatical fan base that really connected with so many of these episodes and characters and relationships. And I don't see it much myself, but I'm happy that people have that. It's with all these different Star Trek series, from the original series to Discovery. It's impossible to like everything and everyone. And, I may love Discovery, but equal amounts of people probably dislike it. And it's the same with Voyager. If I dislike it, I'm not going to trash it and say this isn't my Star Trek. It's just a Star Trek I'm not particularly fond of, and I maybe won't rewatch it as much. But hey, someone else loves it, and I've got my Deep Space Nine and Next Generation and Disco and Enterprise and such like.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I feel the same way, and I'm always... So my my wife has a cousin that loves Star Trek, and I didn't find this out until much later, randomly. And his favorite show was Voyager, and he will defend Voyager till the cows come home. And in preparation for this chat, I was kind of making some notes, and I came across this article about that when right before Disco came out, Netflix revealed their top 10 most Star Trek episodes, right? And they never reveal any of their statistics. And through work, I know a little bit about how they work and things like that. And they don't reveal anything. So it was like a big deal that Netflix was kind of like giving you a glimpse of their analytics. And they revealed their top 10 episodes, and 6 out of the top 10 episodes were Voyager episodes. The top 8, I have the list right in front of me,
I've just loaded up.
Are all Borg episodes, which I think is fascinating, which points to a future where, in all these talking about Disco and all the news announcements, we will see a show that will heavily feature the Borg in the not-too-distant future, mark my words. So many of these creative decisions are now being made in large part because of analytics and data, and, when you look at something like this, 8 of the top 10, so we'll have a Borg-centric series at some point, but out of the top 10, 6 are Voyager episodes. The other 4 are TNG. But the top 5 are Endgame 1 and 2, then Best of Both Worlds Part 1, Best of Both Worlds Part 2, and then Scorpions 1 and 2, and then The Gift, and then Dark Frontier. These are all Voyager episodes.
And then even that, number 8 is Q Who.
Yeah, exactly.
But the bizarrest one is for people just to fill it out. Number 10 is Clues, the episode where they meet a sort of devil in space. Yeah. And then number 9 is Time and Again from Voyager, which is slightly odd considering you'd think, well, Caretaker must be above that. If people are watching that, they probably tend to transition into that. So it was a very bizarre list, and I remember it creating a lot of debate at the time.
No, and it does, and I was really flabbergasted by it. I mean, Clues is one thing, but Time and Again is a very odd choice. But the fact that, so many of the top 8 are Voyager episodes, and they're Voyager episodes relating to the Borg in particular, and 7, that's not surprising. But it is, to what you're saying. It's like Voyager is people, to some Trekkies, it's their jam. And I respect that 100%. I am not a hater. Here I am. Here you are talking about Voyager. I love Voyager. I have a complicated relationship with Voyager, but I do enjoy it. I will not... I think the biggest difference is, like, as opposed to Deep Space Nine or even TNG, I will go and I can watch so many episodes of those series over and over and over again. I do that with Voyager, but my selection of Voyager episodes, I kid you not, is 30 episodes, right?
It'd be about the same.
So, like, there are 30 episodes of Voyager that I will revisit regularly, right? I came across an episode the other day that it was almost like if I hadn't seen it, because I had seen it, but when it first aired when I was in in high school and I saw it live, I hadn't seen it since. It'd been 15, 20 years. So, I legitimately didn't remember what it was. And because it didn't have any knock-on effects to anything that else had happened in the series, but it was, I don't revisit it. That's my thing with Voyager, is there are lots of things that I love, but the pool of episodes that I revisit in comparison to almost any other series is tiny.
So with that, obviously we've got a kind of tiny pool of episodes. What are kind of your favourite episodes that stand out for you that you go to put on when it's on Netflix or dust off the DVDs?
Well, so I love, many of the Voyager two-parters, whether it's Scorpion, Dark Frontier, Endgame, The Killing Game, Year of Hell, any of those episodes are all great, and they're all on the list. But I think those are the usual suspects. I love things like, the Omega Directive, One Small Step, I like Timeless, Someone to Watch Over Me is one of the sweetest, most wonderful episodes in all of Star Trek. I look forward to having a disco episode, like a disco version of that. Deadlock and Death Wish are 2 of my top 15, if not top 10 episodes in all of Star Trek. I think both of those episodes are amazing. The one that no one ever talks about, that doesn't make anyone's top 10 list, but is in my top 10 Voyager list, is The Void from season 7. Oh God, that's an amazing episode of Star Trek. That it is diplomacy over war. Getting to know the other, talking and making alliances in order to kind of to fight for the greater good, working together. It's a fantastic episode of Star Trek. So I think that there are these gems. Worst case scenario, Bride of Chaotica. There are. Again, it isn't to shit on it. I don't want anybody listening and be like, "Oh, these guys are so negative about Voyager." Not at all. It's just I'm more critical of Voyager than I am of any other series. But with that noted, there is this pool of episodes that I will always revisit. What about you?
Yeah, there's quite a few. You've picked many of my favourite ones there. I think Basics Part 1 in particular is a fantastic episode. It's it pays off these sort of 2 seasons worth of steady build with the Kazon out to take Voyager, and I think just as an episode it feels like it's got scope and scale. Every character's doing something. It's payoff big time. I always think of Future's End Part 1 and 2 are such enjoyable episodes. It's always good to see the crew in sort of present day. Revulsion is a season 4 episode I really like, where it's got the hologram killer. I think that's such a good episode. The Raven, the episode after that, where 7 of 9's getting kind of tracked back. The Killing Game is an episode that's just a guilty pleasure one for me. I just love seeing them fighting the Nazis and alien Nazis. It's not that Star Trek has an obsession with portraying the Nazis in it, but I enjoy that one. Message in a Bottle, the Prometheus, the Doctor going back to the Alpha Quadrant. Tinker Tenor, Doctor Spy, enjoy that one. There's quite a few good. Live Fast and Prosper. Not many from season 7 kind of particularly stand out for me, but I do enjoy Shattered, where you see Voyager kind of spread through the years, past, present, and future. So there's some episodes when Voyager is good, it's good, and I'm gonna say I actually had this debate in the Nerd Party group chat today where we were talking about Mission Impossible 2, and naturally Brandon Braga and Ronald D. Moore had written it, and someone went, "Oh, he has written some of the worst episodes, but at the same time he's written some of the best." And I actually think Threshold, which is an episode that gets absolutely butchered by Star Trek fans, is actually one of the best in a way for someone like myself, because Voyager was kind of pretty typical in terms of the episodes it would go do, whereas there was something about Threshold where it was batshit crazy. It committed to a bizarre and crazy concept, and it did it it wasn't like any other episode of Star Trek that I'd ever seen, and it had the most bizarre, absurd ending where the captain and the helmsman have been become futuristic kind of newts, and they have kids, and then they're reverted back to being human. That is absolutely crazy, and I'll watch episodes like that 1,000 times over, a traditional Voyager episode where they go to a nebula, something happens, and they live happily ever after. I like episodes like that, and I'll never forget Threshold, and that is something that I cannot say about many of the episodes of Voyager, even some of the worst ones.
Well, I'm with you that that episode is batshit crazy, but I think that I'm with the popular opinion that I can't watch that episode at all. I think it's terrible. I love the fact that you can geek out about it, because that's the wonderful thing about this level of fandom and the kind of something at Star Trek is that your jam is something that I can't even deal with. But to build on that, I would say that I actually really disliked Message in a Bottle. And I know Message in a Bottle is always in everyone's top 10, top 15 episodes of Voyager, but I really don't like it. I love the Prometheus design. I think that that's a fantastic looking ship, and there's some nice moments in that episode. But really, I think that bridge set looks terrible. The Prometheus set, I think it looks cheap. And if there's something that I hate is I hate it when they do Star Trek on a budget, and you really not I'm not talking about what how the original series looks now and all of that. I'm talking about when they did 90s Star Trek on a budget. I think that episode looks terrible in many respects. It doesn't hold up. I think the whole Andy Dick as EMH is just terrible. And I'm not an Andy Dick hater or anything like that. I just think it's just Andy Dick. There's no character there, right? So I really if you're defending Threshold, I will go up and say get an equal amount of hatred from people out there by saying that I think Message in a Bottle doesn't even crack my top 30 episodes of Voyager.
It'll be interesting to hear which side of the argument people come down on and stuff like that. I enjoy. I think the bridge set almost reminds me of the end of the voyage home, where it's such a white kind of cheap looking bridge set, so it kind of reminds me a bit of that. But I enjoyed that episode. It's one I can certainly, and I like that Herodian sort of plot arc for kind of, you know, the mid-season 4 to kind of the Killing Game, then never to be seen until tens of thousands of light years in the other direction, and like that's another kind of, you know, one that they just sort of, you know, ditched quite quickly and stuff like that. So yeah, like we had the Kazon for 2 seasons, but the Herodian we can only get for like a spell of 10 episodes or something like that.
And the Herodian are, I mean, you know, the Kazon are such like I get the original idea of the Kazon again, and this is where Voyager, like the premise, the idea was much better than the execution. This like idea of like warring gangs, and they control this vast area of space, but they're all different and they're all, you know, battling against each other. I think all of that was very cool. It just wasn't, you know, they came across as kind of watered down diet version of Klingons, and it was such a shame. And the Herodian were different, and I liked that. But I just felt like that episode, it just really doesn't work for me. And what's his face, the Romulan from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, I can't see anything but his character in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. I'm just like, it's the same guy. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, it's crazy. But I suppose when you get to sort of Star Trek at that point where there was so much Star Trek had been created and still to be created, that other actors had to be reused again and time again. It's crazy, and you know, I suppose that's the joy of, you know, that again, that sums up Star Trek for me, is that, you know, there's so much there that, you know, if one person thinks one episode is one of the worst things ever, there's bound to be someone that loves it, writes fanfic about it, and, you know, has it down in their, you know, their top Trek ranks and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that is, you know, and that is the wonderful thing about it. And the wonderful thing is that, you know, and I don't get these haters that come on and be like, and that, you know, and are like on Twitter, Disco isn't Star Trek, or like, I'm like, dude, then don't watch it. Like, don't watch it. Like, what's the big deal? And that's the same thing, you know, like I, you know, I'm not a hater, neither are you, things like that. But just because you put Star Trek on it doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to like it. Yes, I love Star Trek, but it doesn't mean that I'm gonna like this particular thing that has his name on it. And Voyager to me is again, and it's funny because Enterprise, you talked about Enterprise earlier on. Enterprise, I don't have the same complicated relationship that I have with Voyager with Enterprise, and I think in many respects Enterprise is inferior, if I could say, use that word, to Voyager. But partly I feel like Enterprise is very incomplete. Like, Enterprise would have been, I think, a much better show had it been allowed to continue with seasons 5, 6, and 7, and who knows. Because by season 4, when they got their groove, it was on, you know. But the characters on Enterprise to me are, you know, are vanilla. Some of the characters are vanilla, like Hoshi and Travis, but they don't elicit the same kind of response, negative response, that someone like a Harry Kim does for me, right? And arguably, the character of Travis in particular has as little to no character development on Enterprise as Harry does on Voyager. And they're not, you know, it's not like, but the Enterprise crew, and there's something about Enterprise that I'm a lot more forgiving, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is nice, let's watch Enterprise, as opposed to Voyager, where I look at Voyager and I'm just like, the potential is there, but Jesus Christ, they fucked it up, or like they, you know, and I don't know what it is about Voyager that elicits that response in me that something like Enterprise doesn't.
That almost sounds like the perfect kind of cliffhanger for our next discussion, where we will definitely do Enterprise next. We won't wait 6 months, 7 months to do this one next, but maybe in the next few months we'll come back together again and do Enterprise, maybe before Destination Star Trek in Birmingham, or maybe even there, who knows.
Yeah, we'll do it there.
Happen. But yeah, we definitely need to do an Enterprise and examine that one, put that one under the microscope.
Yeah, and you know, again, it's not, I can't tell you, and I was talking to my wife earlier, and I think I've mentioned this in the show. My wife is not a Star Trek fan, but she knows more than your average person, because obviously she's been married to me for 10 years. So through osmosis, she knows a lot, and so she was trying to help me like understand why, you know, I'm so forgiving of all of the of all of Deep Space Nine's shortcomings, and why I can't even identify more than a handful of shortcomings when it comes to Deep Space Nine or its missteps. I can be so forgiving of Next Generation, even when I know empirically that something, it was like a poor creative choice or something wasn't done well or things like that. But with and I can do it obviously as well with Enterprise and Disco. I'm all let's see what the future holds, and I'm so optimistic, and I love everything about it. But Voyager is like that middle child that I'm so hard on, always, and I really cannot articulate why that is. And my only theory is that it came about at a time when I was starting to kind of come into my own as a person, having opinions, and I remember watching Caretaker, being so excited. And 99% of that episode was so good. The premise, the world building, the characters, the introductions, the ship, the scene on Deep Space Nine, Goalie Vex, so many things that I loved that was so exciting for like 12-year-old me. And then the last 2 minutes where it just falls apart. And then in the very next episode, they're all like one happy fleet. And I don't know that I've been ever able to get over that.
No, and here we are 24 years later still talking about it. It's been so much fun talking about Voyager today with you, Carlos. I really can't wait for our next one. We'll definitely got to do Enterprise, Discovery, the movies, original series, then back into the Next Generation. That should round us up quite nicely. And no doubt by the time we finish that, at the rate we've taken to do 2 episodes, we'll probably have a new Star Trek series, some mini movies to watch as well. We've got plenty to discuss over the next few years.
It might take us 24 years to do the whole thing.
Absolutely. And we'll look back on it in our old crippled age going, Voyager wasn't that bad. What were we moaning about when we were in our 30s?
No, we weren't moaning. We're not moaning. We're just pointing out, some geeky fandom frustration, because at the end of the day, it is Star Trek, and I love it, you love it, and it's just, when it comes to the Voyager meal, it just isn't as big for me as it is with one of the other series.
Absolutely. So until kind of next time, Carlos, I say you mentioned some places that people can kind of find you and online, and if anyone wanted to reach out to you and talk about why Message in the Bottle is in fact one of the greatest of all time, where can kind of people find you on social media and reach out to you?
It's really on Twitter, man. My handle is at Double Mac, and that's MACC, because when I'm not tweeting about Star Trek, I'm most likely tweeting about my love for coffee, which is another, that's my one of my favorite characteristics of Captain Janeway, is that she loves coffee, and so do I.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. The return of the Mac again. I look forward to our next episode, and thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real, the honor is to serve, as they say.
Oh well, listen, it's a pleasure to be asked. Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
And I'll see you down in Birmingham.
Down in Birmingham.
Live long and prosper, everyone.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd